Welcome back to Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph, and in this video, we're going to be talking all about best practices for strengthening the Latissimus Dorsi muscle, aka the lats. Now, if you're going to be getting serious about training muscle, strengthening muscle, hypertrophy, or whatever, and especially if you're teaching others to do so, I would make an argument that you should have a good understanding of all the muscles that you're working with, right? Reasonable thing. However, there are certain muscles that I think you should have a little more in-depth understanding of because they're a little bit more complicated in terms of exercise selection and really how to optimize muscle growth and muscle strengthening. And one of those examples is the lats. And that's because the lats are a pretty large convergent muscle, and being so, there are three arbitrarily defined separate regions of the lats, upper, middle, and lower. And it turns out that you can bias individual parts of the lats, and there are different exercises, or I should say different variations on those exercises to do so. And we'll also see that there's another muscle called the teres major, which I jokingly call the baby lats. It's not technically part of the lats, it's a different muscle altogether, has different innervation. But the teres major functions with the lats, and we'll see in just a few minutes how that fits in. So let's take the lat and the teres major and just break it down, simplify it so that you can get best results, and so can your patients and clients. So here's a posterior view of the spine and the right latissimus dorsi muscle, and you can see I already have it divided up into those three regions, upper, middle, and lower fibers. Now, if I were to look at a cadaver, open it up, take a look at the latissimus dorsi muscle, is it going to have three absolutely and separately defined regions of the muscle? No, not at all. This is just one continuous convergent muscle. And those regions are not actually separate. Rather, they're based on the fiber orientation at the various parts of the muscle. And based on that fiber orientation, we arbitrarily define different regions. Okay? They're not actually separate. There's no discontinuity between them. They're not multiple heads of the same muscle. There are no multiple heads. It's just one muscle here. But based on the fiber orientation, we can predict the action that will best suit that fiber orientation. Remember, form dictates function. Structure dictates function. So based on the fiber orientation, we can talk about three different regions. And if we were to perform the action of one of those regions, then theoretically and technically in practice, according to EMG data, we are biasing that particular region. Okay, so that's why we have three separate regions. So let's begin with the upper fibers. The upper fibers have a much more horizontal trajectory, and being horizontal, they are going to facilitate more actions like horizontal abduction. So if I go to a cable machine, work some rear delts, posterior deltoids, there's no way that I can do this without getting some of the upper lats. Additionally, they're also going to be better at facilitating shoulder adduction, not horizontal adduction, just regular adduction. So coming more down from the sides like that, okay? That's going to be more upper fibers. If I go now to the lower fibers, the lower fibers have a much more vertical trajectory. Not totally vertical, but mostly vertical. That means they're going to facilitate more shoulder extension-based movements, where the arms are coming closer to right by the sides. You might be able to see where this is going already, and I promise we'll piece it together in just a minute. The middle fibers are going to be a blend of the two. So starting with the lower fibers, remember they facilitate more shoulder extension, where the arms are coming more by the sides. So any lat-based exercise where the arms are coming right by the sides, doesn't matter what the starting point is, those are going to target more lower fibers. Now, of course, it's still going to get middle fibers, and it's still even going to get a little bit of the upper fibers, but it's just going to bias the lower fibers, a greater percent contribution from those lower fibers. And then jumping back up to the upper fibers, remember they facilitate more shoulder adduction and horizontal abduction. So with the upper fibers, anything where you get that more adduction or a larger shoulder abduction angle, those are going to target more of the upper fibers of the lats. And then briefly, let's take a look at the teres major here. Teres major is not part of the lats. It's a different muscle, has different innervation, as I mentioned before. But if you look at its fiber orientation, it too is very much horizontal. And so we could infer based on the form that it would mimic the function mostly of the upper lats. And in practice, that would be correct. So generally speaking, if we're hitting upper lats, we're also hitting teres major. So hopefully all that anatomy jargon made sense, and you might already be starting to get a feel for how we're going to target the various parts of the lats. But to really drive it home, let's take a look at these specific exercises. And the way that I personally think about lat strengthening exercises is I group them into 4 different groups. It's not to say that you have to do all 4 in the same workout. In fact, I would probably recommend against that because the volume then probably gets a little too high. Rather, these are 4 different groups that you can choose from. But generally speaking, they're all going to follow the same principles that we just talked about in terms of how you bias upper versus lower lats. Now, the first group of lat strengthening exercises we're going to be looking at are pull-ups and pull-downs. And mechanically speaking, they are very similar, although the trajectory of the movement is a little bit different between the two, but for all intents and purposes, they are essentially interchangeable. We're going to start with the pull-ups. Now, right here, I am doing machine-assisted pull-ups. To be honest with you, I am just shy of 300 pounds, and I am not quite able to rep out pull-ups at this point. I can get 1 or 2 decent ones. After that, it's just partials, okay? I'm not able to do it yet. So I use this machine-assisted pull-up, and there is nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, you can get some massive gains in your lats just by doing this and controlling the repetitions. Now, I'm starting here with a wide grip. And when you're doing a wide grip, that is almost always associated with an overhand grip. A lot of people think that how you bias things on rows and pull-ups and whatnot is it overhand, neutral, or underhand? That honestly makes virtually no difference. It really has to do with the grip width. And it just so happens if you're using a wide grip, you really can't do underhand there. I mean, you might be able to do a neutral grip, but the way most machines are set up, you'll be doing an overhand grip. So generally speaking, wide almost always correlates with an overhand grip. And as we've talked about before, this is going to be much more beneficial for biasing the upper lats and the teres major. Now, if I switch to a narrower grip, as you see right here, this is going to be much better for targeting the lower lats. Doesn't eliminate the other components of the lats. We're still getting middle lats and we're still getting upper lats, but it's going to bias the lower lats much more so than the other exercise. Now, you'll also notice here I'm using a neutral grip. Well, you say, well, wouldn't I be doing more of a chin-up, an underhand grip? All depends on the machine setup. This particular machine, it's easier for me to just do a neutral grip, but I'm still doing it narrow. Honest to God, whether it's neutral or underhand is going to make very little difference on which part of the lats that I'm biasing, okay? Don't think of it in terms of overhand, underhand, or neutral, okay? It's the grip width. So whether you use underhand or neutral in this case, you're still getting a lot of lower lats. Some people might argue if you are able to do underhand, it might get a little bit more lower lats and a little less of the other things, but for all intents and purposes, it doesn't matter. The key points you want to make sure you're thinking about are you getting a good stretch on the lats at the bottom of the eccentric? Are you controlling the repetition down during the eccentric? And are you progressively overloading over time? If you're doing all 3 of those things, the exact nature of the grip makes very little difference, unless we're talking about the width, wide versus narrow. Okay, so those are pull-ups. If you are able to do pull-ups unassisted with good form, great. And what most people will say, if you're able to get to somewhere in the 8 to 12 repetitions unassisted, just body weight, that's usually the case where you want to start adding weight, one of those little belts where you can dangle a weight between your thighs. And you can start with just 2.5 pounds or 5 pounds. And some people might argue, why are you even doing that? Well, again, that's how you progressively overload. With something as challenging as a pull-up, 2.5 pounds is still progressive overload. There is absolutely no shame in doing that, and don't let anyone ever tell you different. And then we have lat pull-downs, which mechanically speaking are very similar to pull-ups, but you now have the benefit of having the pads over your thighs, so that way you have some stability there. It gives you the ability to use some leg drive, and you can actually kind of bully the weights a little bit more on pull downs than you can on pull-ups. Pull-ups demand stricter form. Pull downs, while you should be fairly strict with your form, if you want to really, at the bottom, kind of drive the thighs up into that and really pull the weights down and fry your lats, you can do those a lot better on lat pull downs than you can pull-ups, okay? Now that being said, we can play the same game with biasing upper and lower lats on lat pull downs that we did with pull-ups. You can see here that I'm doing a wide grip lat pull down. Again, as you might expect, this is getting a lot more of the upper lats based on that shoulder adduction function. Whereas when I switch to this variation, this is more of a chin-up grip, where I'm doing a supinated underhand grip, much narrower. This is going to be getting a lot more of the lower lats. But just like with pull-ups, remember, this doesn't necessarily have to do with overhand, neutral, or underhand. It has to do with the grip width, which then dictates whether or not we're going into more adduction or more extension of the shoulders. And that's what has the biggest impact on biasing the heads, or I should say the regions of the lats. So pull-ups and pull-downs, that's group one. Now for group two, rows. Here's a big point here. Rows work the lats no matter what. Rows also work the scapular muscles no matter what. And by scapular muscles, I mean upper, middle, lower traps, rhomboids, etc. You cannot differentiate or separate the scapular muscles from the lats. They work together. The scapular muscles move the scapula, the lats move the glenohumeral joint, just like the posterior deltoid and the teres major. You cannot have one without the other, okay? But when we're talking about rows, the shoulder abduction angle is the biggest factor that's going to dictate which part of the lats we're working. So for example, if I'm doing a wide overhand grip row, like you see here on the TRX setup, that's again more of that horizontal abduction function of the lats, and that's going to give me more upper lats and of course teres major. But if I then switch this to more of a narrower grip where the arms are coming right by the side, that's more that shoulder extension, that's going to give me more lower lats. And theoretically, if you turn this into an underhand grip, as you now see here, some people would argue that gives you a little bit more of the lower lats because it's much harder to have your arms come out from the side. It keeps your arms a lot closer to the side. But realistically, supinated grip versus a neutral grip on that, it's not going to make that much of a difference. It's still going to be that shoulder extension. It's still going to get you more lower lats. So that's the big thing on rows. It's the shoulder abduction angle. And technically the shoulder abduction angle does approximate to either a narrow grip or a wide grip, just like we saw on the pull-ups and pull-downs. And in fact, we're going to see the same thing on group three. Group three are lat prayers. Lat prayers are kind of a forgotten about lat exercise, and they are actually amazing not only for hypertrophy of the lats, and you don't need a lot of load with them, they're also great for building a mind-muscle connection with the lats. In fact, for the longest time, I struggled to have a mind-muscle connection with the lats, and lat prayers were actually what did it for me. And now I can feel them working on every exercise, but lat prayers were very beneficial for me early on. With lat prayers, as you can see right here, I'm using a wider grip. Now I've chosen a different apparatus here. I'm using this particular thing that allows me to have a neutral grip. If I wanted an even wider grip, I could choose just a lat pull down bar and go even wider, and that would give me a lot more upper lats. This variation is still probably giving me a decent amount of upper lats, but it's actually probably somewhere in the middle between upper and lower, because my shoulder abduction angle is closer to about 30 or 45 degrees, somewhere in that vicinity, okay? But again, the wider your grip is, the more you get the upper lats. When you are doing lat prayers, one big thing, do not have your elbows fully extended, especially as you come down. When you're using an overhand grip doing that, that is a great way to give yourself tennis elbow, especially as you start loading up weight on this. Always keep your elbows bent, especially as you're coming down. The other thing you'll notice here is as I'm pulling the bar towards my thighs or toward my waist, I'm extending the hips a little bit. Not all the way. I'm not coming up to erect standing, but I'm extending the hips a little bit. The reason for that is the fact that the lats coordinate with the glutes. So by moving into a little bit of hip extension there, activating the glutes, and via the thoracolumbar fascia, the glutes actually help activate the contralateral lat. So when my right glute is active, the left lat is even more active. Conversely, when the left glute is active, the right lat is a little bit more active. So by firing the glutes a little bit with this, you're getting a little bit more bang for your buck on the lats. Now, switching over to more of a narrow grip lat prayer, same idea. This is more of a shoulder extension based movement, so this is going to be a lot more of the lower lats. If you've never tried lat prayers, definitely give them a try. Very good for that mind-muscle connection, and you don't need to load up that much weight, and you can get some monster gains in your lats that will translate over to other lifts, like pull-ups. Now group number 4, the last group, pullovers. There's multiple different ways to do pullovers. You have to ask yourself with this, what am I doing the pullover for? Okay. One example is doing it more for the core. Okay. If I'm doing this more for core stability, which I do give this for patients with low back issues in the clinic who can't yet tolerate dynamic movements against resistance, this is actually really great. I just have the patient brace the core and engage a posterior pelvic tilt and perform the pullover. And that is really good for getting core stability. And eventually, as the core muscles get stronger, you can then start to move into more dynamic movements that are like more sit-up based. Okay? But everyone's got to start somewhere. If I'm doing this more for thoracic extension, you're best off with a rounded bench, as you see right here. Not near as common in gyms anymore. Some occasionally will have one. In general, you might have to just order one for home. But a rounded bench is very good for promoting thoracic extension mobility. And you can still load it up and get some good gains in the lats, but that I think of this more for thoracic extension. This is a mobility exercise. If we are doing this for lat strengthening and hypertrophy, I would make an argument that you should get rid of the supine or flat pullover altogether. The reason being is when we're training lats on pullovers, once you get the weight up to vertical, there's no more tension on the lats. So basically, however far you're able to bring this over, and then all the way back up to vertical, that is the only range of motion that you're using on a pullover, or that you should use, because beyond vertical, and especially even approaching vertical, you lose tension on the lats. There's no more benefit on them. So if you decline it, as you can see right here, you're going to be moving through a larger range of motion. There's more degrees, there's more radians, whatever unit you want to measure before you get up to vertical. So there's a greater time under tension on the lats. Additionally, this will actually really fry your core, much more so than a supine version will. Not that we're going after core, but if you get a decline version of this pullover, oh my gosh, the core is going to be really sore after you finish this exercise. But that being said, I would say if you're going after lats, strength and hypertrophy, there is, in my mind, no reason to do a flat version of this. Decline is just better in every way. There's more range of motion where the lats are under tension. It's just flat out better. And if your gym has a pullover machine, that's really good because that gives you added stability. You don't have to have any complicated setup. You don't have to have a decline bench, anything like that. Take the pin out, just add more weight, and progressively overload. And a good machine, good pullover machine, will have the ability to adjust to larger and larger shoulder flexion angles so that you can progressively add more range of motion. So you can improve your lat flexibility. In fact, I would make an argument that lat prayers and pullovers are both amazing for promoting lat flexibility. Inflexibility will limit your overhead motion. So if you have a patient that has really tight lats, yeah, you could stretch them, but what's even better is to stretch them under tension and work pullovers or lat prayers. And over time, patients' lats flexibility will improve. And generally speaking with pullovers, unless you have some kind of a strange setup, your grip is going to be narrow. If you're using a dumbbell or a kettlebell, it's going to be narrow. Most lat pull down. And generally speaking with pullovers, There's not a lot of variance in the grip width that you're going to be able to use. If you're using a dumbbell or a kettlebell, it's going to be a narrow grip. If you're using a pullover machine, most of them are going to be a narrow grip anyways. So it's going to facilitate more of that shoulder extension motion, and so that's going to be more lower lats. I would make an argument if your goal is upper lats and teres major, kind of getting that upper end of the V taper, pullovers are probably not going to be the best exercise. You're going to want to go with something that's going to be a wider grip version of any of the three aforementioned exercises. So hopefully this video gave you a good understanding of all the exercises to get the most out of your lats. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button for notifications for all videos in the future. Thank you so much.